Between 1850 and 1864, the deadliest civil war in human history tore through the heartland of China, leaving somewhere between 20 and 30 million people dead. In the southern city of Nanjing, a man who believed himself to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ ruled over a theocratic state that controlled some of the richest provinces in the Qing Empire, fielding armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands. How did a failed examination candidate armed with a handful of Christian pamphlets bring the world's most populous empire to the very edge of collapse? The story begins not with armies or ideology, but with humiliation. Hong Xiuquan, born in 1814 to a Hakka family in Guangdong province, had done what millions of young men across China attempted. He studied for the imperial examinations, the gateway to prestige, power, and escape from rural poverty. He failed. Then he failed again. And again. On his third failure in 1837, something inside him broke. He collapsed into fever dreams that lasted for days, visions of an old man with a golden beard who told him to destroy demons, a middle-aged man who called him younger brother, celestial armies, and infernal enemies. His family thought he was dying. He recovered, but the visions never quite left him. For years, Hong returned to his life as a rural school teacher. The dreams filed away as fever-induced madness. Then in 1843, 6 years after his breakdown, he picked up a set of Christian missionary tracts he had received in Canton. The pamphlets were crude translations, mangled theology filtered through cultural translation, but to Hong they were a decoder ring for his visions. The old man with the golden beard was God the Father. The middle-aged man was Jesus Christ. And if Jesus was his older brother, then Hong Xiuquan was the second son of God, sent to earth to purge China of demons. The demons, he concluded, were the Manchu rulers of the Qing dynasty and the traditional Chinese religious practices they permitted. He began to preach. If you're watching because you want to understand the forces that really shaped modern China, the upheavals that conventional histories gloss over, subscribe now. This channel exists to dig into the events that changed everything, the turning points where empire and ideology collided with consequences no one predicted. The timing of Hong's revelation matters. The Qing dynasty in the 1840s was reeling from a wound to its prestige and treasury that would fester for generations. The First Opium War had ended in 1842 with the Treaty of Nanjing, forcing China to cede Hong Kong, open 5 treaty ports to foreign trade, and pay a massive indemnity to Britain. The Qing military, once the instrument of spectacular territorial expansion under Emperors Kangxi and Qianlong, had been humiliated by a small British expeditionary force equipped with steamships and modern artillery. Imperial authority was cracking. Banditry surged. Local militias filled the security vacuum. The exam system, already groaning under the weight of millions of desperate candidates competing for a few thousand positions, became even more cutthroat. Young men like Hong, educated enough to know their powerlessness but not successful enough to join the system, proliferated across the southern provinces. Hong moved to Guangxi province, one of the poorest and most volatile regions of the empire, where ethnic tensions between Hakka settlers and local populations ran hot, where government authority was thin, and where secret societies and bandit groups operated with near impunity. He found followers. At first they numbered in the dozens, then hundreds. They called themselves the God Worshippers Society. They smashed Confucian tablets and Buddhist statues. They pooled their resources and organized communally. They refused to pay taxes. And critically, they began to attract not just the desperate poor, but also skilled fighters, including miners, charcoal workers, and men with military experience. By 1850, local Qing officials were receiving alarmed reports about a strange cult that was drilling like an army and preaching the overthrow of the dynasty. The Qing response was to send an undermanned, poorly paid garrison force to disperse what they assumed was just another local bandit outbreak. On January 11, 1851, in the village of Jintian, the God worshippers rose in open rebellion, rather than submit to arrest. Hong declared the establishment of the Taiping Rebellion, the heavenly kingdom of great peace. It was a name that promised utopia, but would deliver apocalypse. The initial Qing forces sent against them were routed. Within months, the Taiping army had swelled to more than 20,000 fighters and was moving north, absorbing other rebel groups, defeated government troops, and desperate villagers who saw the God worshippers winning. The rebels demonstrated a fanaticism and discipline that shocked Qing commanders. Taiping soldiers followed strict codes: no opium, no tobacco, no alcohol, no prostitution, no gambling. Women fought in segregated units, an almost unthinkable sight in Confucian China. The movement preached radical gender equality in theory, communal ownership of property, and the abolition of foot binding. They enforced their rules with executions and indoctrination. They were not a ragged peasant mob. They were a revolutionary army with an ideology, and that made them vastly more dangerous than ordinary bandits. By late 1852, they had seized Wuchang, then Hankou, then Nanjing, the former Ming capital and one of the great cities of the empire. Nanjing fell in March 1853 after a siege that saw Qing defenders overwhelmed by wave attacks and tunnel warfare. Hong Xiuquan declared it his heavenly capital. Now the Taiping controlled a stretch of the Yangtze River Valley that included some of the most productive agricultural land in China, the Grand Canal, and key tax collection points. The Qing imperial treasury, already drained by the Opium War indemnity and corruption, faced a catastrophic revenue collapse. The emperor in Beijing, Xianfeng, was 32 years old and had inherited a dynasty in crisis. He faced not only the Taiping but also the Taiping Rebellion in the north, Muslim uprisings in the southwest and northwest, and the aggressive encroachments of Western powers demanding more treaty ports and more access. The empire was splintering. But here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The Taiping, having seized Nanjing and established a functioning state, did not immediately press north to Beijing. They had the momentum, the numbers, and the morale. A northern expedition was launched in mid-1853, and it came within striking distance of the capital before stalling due to overstretched supply lines and stiffening Qing resistance. Meanwhile, back in Nanjing, the heavenly kingdom began to consume itself. Hong Xiuquan, the visionary rebel, proved to be a disastrous administrator. He retreated into his palace with a harem of concubines, a hypocritical abandonment of the sexual segregation he imposed on his followers. Power struggles erupted among his top generals and ministers. Young Suking, the movement's military genius and de facto leader, began claiming that God spoke directly through him, positioning himself above Hong. In September 1856, these tensions exploded into mass purges. Thousands were executed in what became known as the Tianjin Incident, including Young and many of his supporters. The Taiping leadership decapitated itself. This internal bloodletting gave the Qing a desperately needed respite. But the dynasty was not saved by its own strength. It was saved by a new kind of Chinese military force. Zheng Guofan, a Confucian scholar official from Hunan province, had been tasked with organizing local militia to defend his home region from Taiping incursions. What Zheng built was something far more significant than a militia. He created the Xiang Army, a force funded by local taxes and gentry contributions, staffed by officers chosen for competence and loyalty rather than connections, and indoctrinated with Neo-Confucian values, framed as the defense of civilization itself against demonic heresy. Zheng's model was replicated by other regional leaders, including Li Hongzhang, who built the Huai Army. These were not imperial forces in the traditional sense. They were regional armies loyal to their commanders, funded outside the central bureaucracy, and far more effective than the bloated and corrupt Green Standard Army and 8 banners that formed the Qing's official military. The shift had profound implications. The Qing court was now dependent on Han Chinese regional strongmen and their personal armies to save a Manchu dynasty. The balance of power within the empire was being rewritten in real time, but survival took precedence over sovereignty. Zheng Guofan spent years methodically encircling Taiping territory, building a fleet to contest the Yangtze, and slowly strangling the Heavenly Kingdom supply lines. His strategy was patient and brutal. Captured Taiping fighters were often executed en masse. Cities that resisted were subjected to prolonged sieges designed to starve the population into submission. This was total war. The international dimension further complicated the conflict. Western powers had initially watched with curiosity, some even hoping the Christian-influenced Taiping might prove more amenable to trade and missionary work than the Qing. But when Taiping envoys met with British officials, the theological gulf became clear. Hong's idiosyncratic Christianity bore little resemblance to Western denominations, and his theocratic ambitions threatened the stability that foreign merchants required for commerce. Moreover, the Taiping controlled the Yangtze Valley, disrupting tea and silk exports. By the early 1860s, Britain and France, having just concluded the Second Opium War with the Qing, shifted decisively toward supporting the dynasty. Western officers like Frederick Townsend Ward, an American adventurer, and Charles Gordon, a British officer who would later die in Khartoum, helped train and lead Qing forces. The ever-victorious army, a hybrid force of Chinese soldiers under Western command and discipline, became a key asset in the final campaigns against the Taiping. The noose tightened. By 1863, Zheng Guofan's brother Zheng Guoqian had surrounded Nanjing with siege works and artillery. Inside the city, conditions deteriorated into nightmare. Food ran out, starvation set in. Hong Shuquan, the peasant who had proclaimed himself the son of God, fell ill in June 1864. Some sources suggest suicide by poison, others claim natural illness worsened by eating wild grass in the absence of food. He died without seeing the end he had prophesied. In July 1864, Qing forces breached the walls of Nanjing. What followed was a massacre. Tens of thousands of Taiping fighters and civilians were killed in the street, fighting and executions that followed. Hong's teenage son, declared the new heavenly king, fled the city with a remnant force but was captured and executed months later. The heavenly kingdom was extinguished. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Estimates of the death toll from the Taiping Rebellion range from 20 to 30 million people, possibly more. Some died in battle, but vastly more perished from starvation, disease, and the collapse of agricultural production in the war zones. Entire regions were depopulated. The Yangtze Delta, once among the most densely settled and prosperous parts of China, looked like a wasteland. Cities like Suzhou and Hangzhou lost the majority of their populations. The destruction rivaled or exceeded the bloodiest conflicts of the 20th century in absolute terms. And this happened in a country without machine guns or industrial warfare. But the rebellion's impact was not merely demographic. It fundamentally altered the structure of Qing power. The regional armies that saved the dynasty did not disband. Zheng Guofan, Li Hongzhang, and others became the most powerful men in the empire, governing vast territories with their own military forces and revenue streams. The central government in Beijing had been weakened beyond recovery. This decentralization set the stage for the warlordism that would fracture China after the Qing collapse in 1912. The scholar officials who led these armies also recognized that China needed more than Confucian virtue to survive in a world of steamships and rifles. They initiated the self-strengthening movement, an attempt to modernize China's military and industry while preserving Confucian social order, summarized in the slogan, "Chinese learning for essence, Western learning for utility." Arsenals were built, shipyards established, Western technical advisors hired. Yet the movement remained superficial, starved of resources, and undermined by conservative opposition at court. The contradictions it tried to manage, between tradition and modernity, between imperial authority and regional power, between Confucian values and industrial capitalism, would paralyze reform efforts for decades. The Taiping Rebellion also marked a turning point in how the Qing related to foreign powers. The dynasty that had once viewed Western nations as barbarian tributaries now depended on their military assistance and loans. The customs revenue that funded the indemnity payments and government operations was administered by foreign inspectors under the Imperial Maritime Customs Service, led by the British official Robert Hart. Sovereignty was being hollowed out from within. Each foreign intervention, each concession, each treaty port chipped away at the fiction of imperial authority. Young Chinese intellectuals watching this process drew radical conclusions. If a Christian-inspired rebellion nearly destroyed the empire, and if only foreign guns and regional warlords saved it, then perhaps the entire Confucian imperial system was obsolete. The memory of the Taiping also poisoned the well for future reform. Hong Shuquan's movement had combined foreign ideas with utopian promises and ended in catastrophic violence. When later reformers proposed adopting Western political systems, or when Sun Yat-sen and his revolutionaries called for overthrowing the Qing, conservatives could point to the Taiping as evidence that foreign ideologies brought only chaos. The rebellion became a cautionary tale weaponized against change, even as the dynasty continued its slow disintegration. There is a grim irony in how the Taiping Rebellion is remembered. In the People's Republic of China, historians have at times portrayed Hong Shuquan as a proto-revolutionary, a peasant leader rising against feudal oppression, even as his Christian theology and theocratic vision fit poorly with Marxist materialism. The Qing officials who crushed the rebellion, men like Zheng Guofan, have been alternatively condemned as reactionaries or praised as patriots depending on the political winds. The rebellion resists easy categorization. It was a religious movement and a social revolution. It was anti-Manchu ethnic nationalism and universalist Christian theology. It was communalist utopianism and despotic theocracy. It promised liberation and delivered apocalypse. What remains undeniable is that the Taiping Rebellion nearly succeeded. Had the Northern Expedition reached Beijing in 1853, had the Tianjin incident not gutted the leadership in 1856, had the Western powers provided support instead of opposition, the Qing dynasty might have fallen a half-century earlier than it did. The course of Chinese and world history would have been unrecognizable. Would a Taiping China have modernized faster or collapsed into fragmentation? Would the absence of the Qing have prevented the humiliations of the late 19th century or invited even more aggressive foreign intervention? We cannot know, but the closeness of the outcome should unsettle any sense that the Qing survival was inevitable. The rebellion also reveals something essential about the nature of imperial collapse. Dynasties do not fall simply because of external invasion or economic crisis. They fall when the legitimacy that binds subjects to the throne disintegrates, when regional power brokers conclude they can better secure their interests outside the system than within it, when ideological alternatives, however strange, offer hope that the existing order cannot. The Qing in 1851 faced all of these conditions. It survived not through reform or renewal, but through the desperate expedient of empowering regional militarists who would eventually inherit the ruins. The rebellion was a preview of the warlord era, the revolutionary movements, and the civil wars that would define the next century of Chinese history. Standing in the ashes of Nanjing in 1864, an observer might have concluded that the worst was over, that the Qing had weathered the storm and would recover. But the empire that emerged from the Taiping Rebellion was a hollow shell. It would stagger through the next 4 decades, losing wars to France, Japan, and the Eight-Nation Alliance, signing away more territory and sovereignty with each defeat until the Revolution of 1911 swept away the last emperor. The Taiping Rebellion did not destroy the Qing dynasty, but it shattered the foundations, and everything that came after was built on fractured ground. The question is not why the dynasty eventually fell, but how it managed to linger so long after the catastrophe that should have ended it.